Welcome, welcome. Well, it's always affirming when we have a important forum that people log in, because that means they're either reading their e-news or watching the service or somehow got word of this, or they're talking to their friends, all of which I hope are happening. Good to see you all. Welcome. So I'll start with just a few very brief brief comments of welcome. First, if you're new to Zoom, most of you probably have done something on Zoom during this time. In your bottom left-hand corner, dependent on your device, you can mute yourself, and that's the easiest when you're not speaking and when others are presenting, just to eliminate background noise and the screen switching. In the upper right-hand corner, often, again, I say this with caveats, you can choose how to view the Zoom meeting. So there you can either choose speaker view or gallery view. Speaker will allow you to see who's actively speaking. Gallery will allow you to see most everybody. And it might just highlight whoever's volume is there. And then we also invite you, there'll be some time throughout, I think, our forum, depending on how much time there is. I know there's lots of folks here to ask questions and interact, and you can unmute yourself during those times, and or during the whole time, you can use the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen and write a question or a comment or something you want to make sure we get, and that'll be recorded as well, so we'll have that documentation. Even if we don't have time to get to all of it, we'll still have it for the team to attend to at some point. I'll be Minister of Tech and keep welcoming folks in that come in the waiting room, as well as at the end, I might hand it over to Amy Nelson. Hi, Amy, who always helps make sure our time together ends smoothly as I go off to put children to bed and get ready for another meeting. So it's great to see all your faces. Thank you for joining this conversation tonight. And if you have any questions or tech issues, you can try to use the chat as well, and I'll help try to make things go smoothly. With that,
I'll make sure to monitor the chat over here. So
thank you, Amy. Appreciate that. With that, I believe I'm to share my screen for our opening chalice lighting. So I'm going to share. This should pop up on your screen so you can see it. And if maybe Anne or George, somebody I can see there, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Good, great. Thank you. So I believe we'll begin. I have a chalice here I'm lighting in my home. Welcome to my home. Thanks for inviting me into yours. And here we are together in a conversation about our church home. So I'll turn it over to the Building Our Future team, who is Gail and Greg, and Anne and George. And I forget who's going first. And Carmen as well, Carmen Frana.
So we've asked Luke to write some words that sort of have us ask, because we've been asking the question, why are we doing this discernment process? Why have we been meeting with people and visiting churches and gathering data? And why are you all giving up a Wednesday evening to get an update? And so, as is so often the case, Luke seems to be able to write what exactly we need to hear. And so we've asked him to start our chalice lighting with the Building Our Future Beyond Ourselves, and we will join in to help share our thoughts that he has crafted for us. So Luke.
Thanks, Anne. So Building Our Future. beyond ourselves. Our congregation imagines a future building and grounds that expresses our values in its very structure and its purpose being beyond ourselves. Through surveys and forums, our church consistently shared their belief that our current space creates many obstacles to fully living our values. The hopes they shared were rooted in our mission statement, to be a welcoming, compassionate community that nurtures spiritual growth and practices justice.
Welcome and compassion, a space committed to compassion and accessibility that is more natural than an accommodation, including gender-neutral bathrooms and easy wayfinding for a diversity of mobility and sensory needs. This includes spaces that are connected, inviting, and inspirational. Next slide.
Community and spiritual growth, a space that is intended for use beyond ourselves. This includes spaces that are easily used by the wider community as a catalyst for conversation, learning, service, and the arts. This includes flexible space to nurture spiritual growth through rites of passage, fellowship, and community service.
Carmen.
Take this one. Practicing justice, a space that is deeply connected with the natural world. This includes an eco-justice focus with sustainable utilities and land stewardship, connection to nature with windows and natural light, an outdoor green space for learning, spiritual practice, communal gardening, social events, and play.
So this is George. I'll take you through the next couple of slides. The first slide here kind of covers our activities from when we started back in October 2018 through this forum today, essentially, which is actually, I think in April, going to be about 2.5 years ago that we started. So just real briefly, what we've done, we reviewed 204 building survey responses. We visited 5 new or remodeled UU churches, and those were in Duluth, White Bear Lake, Wayzata/Minnetonka, St. Paul, and Iowa City, which was a virtual tour, plus talking with a couple of our congregants that have been at that Iowa City church. We've hosted 9 congregational forums. We've consulted with a local realtor regarding a building appraisal and general property availability in the Rochester area. We've conducted 2 initial architectural assessments. We've reviewed the credentials of 22 architectural firms. The 2 initial architectural assessments were HGA and Locus. We had those on site for them to go through our church and then come back to us with their recommendations. We have received a gift offer of land from an anonymous donor. We've investigated 19 potential available properties, and that's included site visits to 10 of these properties. So starting as of today and going forward, here's some of the activities that are on our plate. We're planning visits to recently constructed local churches. One of the last Sunday, we had a conversation with Dr. Jim Mayer. He works for Mayo Clinic. That was a very valuable resource. He was one of the project coordinators with the Autumn Ridge Church building just off Historic Drive. And we spent quite a bit of time talking with him, and he invited us, and we're interested in going through the Autumn Ridge Church. He actually shared, I think it was something like 100 pages of meeting minutes that they had talking about their process. The second church we hope to visit is Holy Spirit Catholic Church. Our understanding is that church is in Rochester, and that was designed by HGA architects. And the third one, quite a few of us have been in it from time to time is B'nai Israel. They were, I think in the early 2000s, they built that church, and that was also an HGA design. We're going to continue to investigate new properties as they come available on the market. We're seeking an updated market value of our current property, just to get a sense if we did decide to sell, what a kind of a bit of a closer value is than kind of a high level figure we have at this point. We'll be making a building our future team recommendation to the board. And then starting in mid-May, we'll initiate or conduct the upcoming Stewardship for Us retreat. And then we'll be hosting additional future congregational forums. One of the activities that has kind of been on the plate of the church for the last several years, going back to 2017, was the Historical Preservation Committee. And this is actually, I should mention just to start with, back at that time, the term historical was used, but now the term that everyone is using within the city and the commissions is heritage. So there's kind of a transition in the terminology there. Our team met with the City of Rochester Community Development, Heritage Preservation this past week. We confirmed our church is included with along over 100 other potential properties, which essentially states that any exterior alterations or demolition would require review and approval by the Heritage Preservation Commission prior to any work starting. The heritage designation could possibly decrease our market valuation and the pool of potential buyers, although that's not necessarily a known fact at this point. And we also feel as a committee that there's really no upside to designation as a heritage landmark site. Back in 2017, they were referencing things like you may be eligible for some low cost or low interest rate loans for construction activity. I'm not sure that's even out there at this point.
Yeah.
So it's likely, I mean, that's not an incentive for us. So our goal going forward is to be removed from the potential list. In order to do that, we talked with, the woman's name is Molly at the Community Development, and their goal on the Heritage Preservation Commission is to review all 100+ properties over the next 2 years. So we requested to be added to the next available meeting, and we're tentatively scheduled to be on the agenda for the Zoom meeting on April 27th, where we'll take this forward. So we're going to have some prep work to do for that ahead of the meeting. And I think I will turn it over to Greg next, I believe.
Hi, this is Greg. You've all heard reference in this meeting so far about the generous contingent gift of land. And there was a special announcement that went out to the entire congregation in late January regarding this. So this involves approximately 10 acres of land in Northeast Rochester within the city limits. It's a pleasant piece of property. This is all contingent upon the outcome of the process that's been mentioned so far, the Stewardship for Us process, the process that we're going to be continuing to be involved in for many months, and a vote from the congregation on whether to move to any new location and to undertake a capital campaign to support that. So this gift is contingent. It won't be accepted until these other votes happen, until the congregation decides it wants to accept this piece of property as well. The donors have very generously stated that if another site is chosen, or in the event the congregation decides to stay put, they're still intending to be generous with their resources to our church, and will make an in-kind contribution. So this contingent gift is, as the special announcement noted, allows for broader imagination in our process by eliminating a potential logistical and financial hurdle. You can imagine that property is expensive if you want to get within near distance of where we are now and where in central Rochester. If this process plays out over a number of years, as we fully expect, who knows what will be available down the road and how expensive it'll be. So this contingent gift is a potential boon to us in terms of removing a huge financial question mark if it works out and if the congregation agrees. Next slide, please. So other considerations regarding this potential site and other sites. If we move from our present property, we'll have to have a number of discussions with planning and zoning. Planning and zoning will want to review our site plans. There'll be conversations about streets and utilities, et cetera, et cetera. There'll have to be an architectural assessment regarding the general suitability of the property that we would want to build on. And there'll be ongoing investigation of all available properties if this congregation votes to move from our current site. Other sites might be better than the site that the donors have provided us. We won't know that until months down the road when it becomes clear, if it becomes clear that we want to look elsewhere and we look closer at this site versus other sites that we have on our list. I think this is someone else. If not, I can cover it. Did someone else have this slide?
I was going to take that one.
Yours, Ann.
Okay, so certainly as the board president, I have been receiving comments, but also other members of the Building Our Future team have also been receiving very positive comments. I've had people comment that they just are overwhelmed by the possibility, the enormity of such a generous gift. The idea that a new location, a new building would allow us to live our values and also to have a location that actually could be seen as a beacon, a visible sign of our values, both in work of justice and environment. There have been some concerns about the fact that, as with any church, there are those days and months where maybe space is less used. So that has been voiced, but in complementing that has also been the fact that other people have gotten in touch with me to say that with new space, we could provide space for partners and actually work and utilize our building, with much more community connections. And likewise, I've heard comments from some people who thought that by moving to a location that has greater space, land space, that could be used for teaching capacity, environmental studies, again, community partnerships, by partnering with community gardens. So it all comes back to, so far what I've been hearing, and I think the other members of the team have heard, is just sort of an overwhelming sense of awe at the generosity of these anonymous donors and the potential that this gives us as a community for what we might be able to do in the future as we move forward with this discernment process.
Okay.
Anne,
Yes,
there's a question in the chat.
I see that.
Okay, I don't know if you want to acknowledge that now or if you want to keep going. I just wanted to draw your attention.
I think, Margot, we've got some more slides. Some of your question might be answered with those questions, and if not, we will definitely come back to that question because it's very relevant to what the building team has been thinking about.
Okay, so the next. So for those of you who are new to the forums or haven't been aware of our connections with a stewardship consultant, I'll just update you there. We've met with Rachel Maxwell, who is a stewardship consultant for Stewardship for Us. It's an adjunct organization with the UUA. The UUA doesn't provide that service to us anymore because of budget cuts on their end, but this is the consulting firm that they use, and these are the folks that work directly with Unitarian Universalist churches to conduct feasibility studies, capital campaigns, and what we're going to be doing for the Next Steps weekend. Now, this Next Steps weekend is going to be in conjunction with Rachel. She's going to have virtual conversations with folks in our church, May 10th through the 16th. And on the 16th, it'll culminate with an hour-long presentation on her part for her assessment of our congregation. We're sending her information currently on everything from our history to our annual giving to our pledge campaigns to individual gifts that pledges that individuals have, our bylaws. I mean, every single thing that she'd like to know about our church, we're sending her so that she's familiar with us. And then at the end of that weekend, she will assess our readiness to proceed, whether the congregation has received enough information to stay or go, to make that kind of a vote. And then she's helped us with a timeline so that we know what's happening or when to proceed as a building our future team. And so part of this leading up to the forum will be, or leading up to the Next Steps weekend will be some additional forums on our parts. Then we'll have the Next Step weekend, followed by a congregational vote on whether to stay or go. And then at that point, that triggers other things. If we decide to do nothing, or we decide we're going to do something on the current site, or we're going to go build new, that then triggers other things that happen. Whether to accept the gift of land, whether to undertake a capital campaign. We'd undertake a capital campaign whether we did a remodel on our current site or we were going to build new. So all of those kinds of decisions will be made by the congregation. So the congregation will have a vote to accept this particular gift of land. The congregation eventually will have a vote on whether to undergo a capital campaign. Now, in order to do that capital campaign, she will help us with a feasibility study, and she will only do that in person. It works better than that. So the timing for COVID and vaccines and everything else will have to be addressed so that we can gather together in person. And she will be meeting with probably 50 or so pledge units in our congregation to assess our financial capability to proceed into a capital campaign. So there are a lot of other things that'll fall into place, and we'll post sort of the timeline that as that evolves on our website so that you can keep abreast of what's happening. And the Stewardship for Us weekend is on the church calendar right now, so as a reminder that that may happen, and then we'll be in contact with each of you that will be participating or that will be asked to participate and schedule that prior to May 10th. Okay. See, Anne, I think you have this on, you're muted.
So we have a new web page on our website. As you're looking at the bar across the top of the website, I think, is Luke maybe going there? It's the last tab or the last actual clickable link. And so you can see it's building our future. The first things that you'll find is that historical perspective of what buildings we have had, where we have been in our 5 different buildings in our 150-year history. As Luke has given a sermon about, we have been looking at the fact of a move about every 50 years. So we're right on time to be studying this issue. Included on that is the timeline that you've seen in previous slides, and so at this point we have gone through church information gathering, project information gathering, and now we're in that far right column of project focusing with these forums, further consultation, and additional consultations as needed before we get to the congregational votes. Important, we have added a link, a button, a link that will take you to a form. I'm sorry. And that allows you to raise questions, make suggestions. You know, I realize that people process information differently, and there are those who might think of their question tonight and put it into chat, and there are those who need to mull this over and get back to the team. And we welcome your comments and your suggestions and your questions, if only it is to say, have you thought about, and we can get back to you and you can say, yes, we have, and here's the answer, or no, we haven't, and we will. We've included the special letter because it is such a unique and interesting gift that we have, or potential gift that we have received. So the announcement letter that Luke and I sent out to the congregation, as well as the letter from the donor. We've had a number of forums on this topic, and so the recordings of those forums will be posted so that people who need to listen to the information again, or if they are not among the 60 or so people here tonight, they can find that information. We've added save the date information that Gail has already mentioned. And then you will see that we have the YouTube links to the earlier forms. And those are interesting because it gives more of the survey data in more detail, as well as a number of those PowerPoint presentations have lots and lots of visuals from our visits to the locations that we went on site, as well as the virtual site to Iowa City. So I just want you to know that, you know, as you find, as we find more information, we'll be posting it here. So this will be your one-stop shop for information about the Building Our Future Beyond Ourselves campaign.
And there's another question in the chat.
I see that. Luke, we've got one more slide that we were going to have Carmen cover that tells about when people have opportunities for future events. Do you want to, Carmen, can you do that from memory or not? There we go. And then we'll go to Q&A. Carmen, you're muted.
Sorry. All right, so just to remind you, there are some opportunities for some future engagement. There's the Stewardship for Us consultation, and that will be May 10th through 16th this year. We're hoping to do some virtual property hikes and some on-site walks. So you can have an opportunity to see some of the land that is available and to get an idea of what an acreage or what the sites are available in Rochester. And we realize that right now is probably not the best time to go hiking out in the snow. But once the weather gets better, we're hoping to do some hiking and do that take some video, so everyone will have the opportunity to see that. And of course, future forums, the dates will go to the website that Ann just talked about, and those dates will be determined soon. So thank you all for coming, and I think we probably are going to open up for questions and comments now.
So I'll go back to the first question that was put into chat. Thank you, Marco.
Ann. Oh,
Yes.
sorry. Can I just have a point of order? It might be easiest to continue putting your questions in the chat, just to deal with the mutes and everything like that. So just a logistic piece.
But also the advantage of putting them in chat, we won't lose any of them, even if we don't get to them tonight, because we do have a number of people, including several board members, who have to be at a 7:30 board meeting. So I will start with the first one because I think it's very, very important. George and Greg can jump in here also, because first question deals with my statement about obstacles to living our value. I think that what I've picked up during the 2 years that we have been studying this is that we have a building that was built at a time when energy was cheap. We weren't worried about insulation. We didn't know about R factors. And so as we've looked at what can and cannot be done, I mean, our building just is simply not designed to be the green environment, the green sanctuary that we would like. Whether that's insulation or green energy, or even the accessibility of having gender neutral restrooms. I mean, our facility simply has this footprint that has locked us in where we are right now. George or Greg, want to add anything?
I agree with everything you're saying. Another major issue is the amount of parking, that we're really constrained on that for both all types of parking situations as we continue to grow in the future. There's just not an easy way to add additional parking space. Greg, did you have anything you wanted to add? Oh, I think Greg is
Sure.
muted there. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, George, and thanks, Ann. Yeah, as a member, along with Ann and George and Carmen and Luke and Gail, this process for 2 to 3 years now, it really strikes home with me as we talk about meeting our values as a church and a congregation, that the status quo cannot continue. So that means that we either need a major, major renovation of where we are, or we need to go somewhere else. So we need to think about the hard choices of, is it practical to make the kind of renovations, affordable renovations to the building that we're in, or to look somewhere else? So that's where we're at right now.
And the question becomes being good stewards of our money. If you invest in our current building, we still aren't overcoming certain obstacles, whether it's parking space. We don't have the room to expand for large gatherings, for Wednesday night dinners, administrative space, all of those things. It's still a multi-level building that's not completely accessible. In many ways, the energy efficiency things are not as workable. With the architects that we've spoken to, and also in lieu of not knowing what our status is as a potential landmark historic building, we're not able to do anything on our current site right now with the potential designation that we have. We couldn't demolish it if we wanted to. And with the bedrock underneath, we're limited on what we can do to expand. And then even adding additional seating and so on in the sanctuary triggers additional parking. There are certain requirements that you must have to do that. So we don't have the space capacity to do what we want, or the green area to do what we want, or the play area for children. Those kinds of things. And buildings say a lot about who we are and what we value. I think that's kind of another thing to think about. So the question becomes, are we good stewards of our money to invest in a building that's old and tired, that has some obstacles, and we still not get what we want? And we'd also be planning not for ourselves currently, but where do we want to be in the future? And what does this congregation look like 15 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now? One of the interesting and the most poignant things that in speaking with Dr. Mayer, who is the project consultant at Autumn Ridge, that was their 5th building since their history, where they've moved to now. And the conclusion that they made was always coming back to why are we doing this, and why are we having this discussion with their congregation? And he said, who was it in the past that loved us so much that gave us this opportunity to have this new space that enabled us to connect with the community, share our values with those in the community, open their space to those freely in the community? So those are some things to think about when you're talking about obstacles to living our value.
So a spin-off question. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add one small thing. You may remember, some of you were back in the days when we all sat right next to each other and shared germs freely. We had a forum with Keith Ellison in our sanctuary. It was a fairly packed forum. And working with Keith Ellison's office beforehand, one of the questions and concerns about our building was the amount of accessible parking. I said about how many spaces we had in that upper lot. I said, though they're at a slight slant, but that's the amount that we had. And so there was concern whether that was accessible enough, not knowing who would be coming or able to come to a community forum that was open. So there was some questions about how best to have our space ready and attentive to the needs of the community.
there's also an obstacle to growth. You know, when a church reaches a certain size and people come in the door and it looks pretty full, they say there's no room for us. And so your building can limit your ability to grow as well. So that's something to keep in mind too. And maybe Luke, you can address that particular thing if I didn't thoroughly enough. Okay.
So a spin-off from this question is, has the possibility of adapting our building been considered? I'll say yes, we have, because we've talked with 2 architects who've given us their professional opinion. That's, you know, building design is not in my wheelhouse. George or Greg, since you're our property experts on this committee, do you want to add some additional information about that question?
Do you want to take it, Greg, to start with, or? Oh, okay. So I guess I'd reiterate what we heard from both of the architects that were on site. The building envelope, the whole question about energy efficiency is it would be extremely difficult, not impossible, but extremely difficult and very expensive to correct or improve the building envelope to get the kind of energy efficiency, you know, that I think we want. And then we may be limited on top of that with not being able to modify the exterior design as well. So I'm thinking back to the HTA, they provided some high level cost estimates, and those totally would have to be redone at this point based on what's happened with the cost of building materials over the last year. But I'm just going to kind of ballpark this, that if we were to do a major remodel and try to hit, 80-90% of what we were after, it was in the $5± million range. And building new with probably a little bit smaller square footage, excluding the price or the cost of land, I think was in about 2 million more, right around 7 million. So I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but one of the ways that I look at this is, if those are somewhat realistic, they'd have to be inflation adjusted and a lot more specifics. But do you want to try to land by staying on the existing site, still not meet a lot of the obstacles or correct them, like the parking or the future growth, or where do we want to be 25 to 50 years? Or for 2 million more over a long period of time, do we want the chance to start new again and hopefully fix really all the problems and all the things that people have brought up in the forums? So I'll turn it over to Greg real quick.
In the interest of time, I just want to add one point. The other part of the financial equation that George mentioned is that if we move to a new site, we could apply what we would get from selling our current site towards the cost of developing a new site. So that closes that gap.
Yeah, and I think the earlier estimate we had, this is probably going back half a year to a year ago, it was 4 million plus or minus is kind of a ballpark figure of our current site.
So Pat Wimmer had a great question, and it's a nice one because it's easy to answer, I think. She wants to know what makes our building a historic, or why is it on the heritage site? And to my knowledge, it ended up on the historic site because it is that unique style. We've been able to determine that there are 2 other concrete shingle box-like structures in the country: Rochester, Minnesota, a place in New York, and a place in Florida. And the shingles that are on the exterior of the building are a unique concrete construction that isn't done anymore. And so we ended up on the heritage list because of that. Which is also what would happen if we stayed on the heritage list. The concrete shingles that are on the exterior of the building are not manufactured anymore. So just to sort of keep that in perspective, it was one of those things that people experimented with 60 years ago, and they're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, can I add something real quick? Yep. So when we had the conversation with Molly from the city, she said there were 9 categories that they kind of look at to decide the feasibility if a given site should become heritage. Our category out of the 9 was architectural interest. So it goes back to what Ann said. I mean, I don't know what all the other 8 categories are, but they're looking at first UU because of the architectural interest.
So Linda Thompson asked a question about that designation and the fact that she was thinking that we had to accept the designation. I can tell you that we specifically asked the paid staff member from the city, how did we end up on this list? Because we didn't apply. And the answer was that the historical preservation, the heritage preservation group, as they identified locations in cities and facilities around the city, created the list. So it is not something that this church, this board, previous boards applied for. It was done by a group of people who had an interest in preserving aspects of Rochester's unique construction.
And it follows a new city ordinance for historic preservation. So that's why we're trying to meet with the commission in April to see if we can challenge this to remove that, because it impedes what we're able to do. We couldn't demolish the building currently because we're a potential designation. If we were going to remodel the building or do something, it would have to maintain the same exterior character that it is now. So we're limited on what we could do. They may be able to let us expand, but again, that's a city decision that's doing this with this historic site. So we're hoping we can maybe get out of this designation because it creates a lot of issues, whether we stay or go, or even for a potential buyer coming in. So we'd like to do that. Now, Linda had a question too on, is it smart to talk to this when we're not meeting in person to be able to have a capital campaign in this economic time and so on. A capital campaign would come farther down the road. And if we made a decision even in June to stay or go, it buys us a lot of time. If we thought that staying in our current building for the time being is what we do, then we do that. If it looks financially impossible to do the things we want to do in a remodel, that's a decision we'd make. Or if we decide we'd like to accept this land and then do some drawings to see what's happened that could work on that land. If that's feasible, then we'd have to do that. We'd also have to pay for drawings at the time if we wanted to remodel. But depending on how things go with COVID and how everybody is, we wouldn't have an in-person meeting with the consultant until we can do that. So that gives us some time down the road. Now, we've successfully done a capital campaign in the past where we just added an elevator and an entrance and a coat closet and remodeled it in the bathroom for over $1 million or so, and the congregation was much smaller. Am I fearful of a capital campaign? Not really, because I don't think we know what individual circumstances are. We were surprised as a building team that we had this offer of 10 acres of land. So you just never know what is out there, what happens, and what some of those angel donors that are out there, or what people have or are willing to do until we see. And if a feasibility study shows that we're not ready for that capital campaign, we can vote to say, yes, we'd like to pursue that and have a feasibility study. But if it shows we can't raise it, well, then we wait and we hold out again. It's not like it's a done deal. I mean, it's all congregationally decided. So I hope that answers your question. It's not like we're trying to push into some particular arbitrary timeline, but what's going to be best for the congregation and our needs, and what's going to help us moving forward.
So as we're kind of ending our time, just a couple minutes over here, I'm putting a couple things in the chat. One is a reminder, there's a follow-up kind of secondary forum, but less of a time constraint as a Wednesday night, this Sunday at 11:30. Same presentation, but then the conversation will continue. I assume we'll get to some of those other questions as well that might come in between now and then. And you can find updates at urochmn.org/buildingourfuture. And just to note too about that consultation in May with Rachel Maxwell from UU's For Us, or Stewardship for Us. is that it will, she will, in her final report on May 16th, she'll make a recommendation to the leadership of what the timeline going forward should be, what the readiness of the congregation is financially, in terms of mindset, all of that. So she'll have some guidance for that, learning from what other churches are also doing during this time. I know from some colleagues on the East Coast, during this year, they've put on the market and sold their building, which they'll never go back into, which is a surprise, but they're working through it. Other congregations have gone through candidating and called new ministers during this time. So there's a lot to learn from the experience in other congregations and how they're having these important and hard conversations in the time of distancing. And we also know that our process, we're not that far along too, so we'll have opportunities to engage it in new ways. So I just wanted to mark the time, add that plug for those May things. Anne, or other members of the team, you have other things you wanted to respond to in our, we're a little over, but that's all right.
Go ahead, Gail.
It was just a question of any design proposals been made. No, not yet, because that kind of follows farther in the plan. We have to decide whether we're going to stay or go, and then you pay for those architectural drawings, and then you see what that vision could be, and then you have that feasibility study, and then you raise money toward that vision. But you know, it's sort of putting the cart before the horse. So we haven't done that yet, and that will come a little later in the plan.
But tied with that, we have been collecting all the comments that people have made. So all of the things that were written in the open-ended questions of the surveys about things that people want in a building. And that's one of the things that I just realized didn't make it to the website, and we will post that PDF. It's about a 3 or 4 page list listing the various things that people have said that that is important to them in a space, regardless of where that space is, that it's important to them in a church space. So that will be the start of how we then discuss what we want in a future space, whether it's in our current building without change, our current building with change, or a new space. So we're way over time, but thank you all. If you're still interested on this topic, which I hope you are, join us again on Sunday, or if not, join us at the next time we have a future update. Thank you. Thanks, Luke.
Be well. Thanks all. Take good care.
Bye.